Let me tell you a story, one you might find hard to believe, but every single word of it is true. It is a story about ambition, about friendship, and about the kind of betrayal that hollows you out before forging you into something far harder, far more resilient. It is a story about how I built something from nothing, only to have it snatched away, and then how I took it all back, piece by agonizing piece, with a precision that would make a master watchmaker weep. It all started, as many grand ideas do, in the quiet hum of a coffee shop, late one night. The air was thick with the scent of stale espresso and the distant rumble of city traffic. I had been working on this concept for months, a digital platform designed to revolutionize local commerce. Think of it as an ecosystem, a hyper-local network connecting small businesses with their immediate communities, not just for sales, but for shared resources, for collaboration, for true community building. It was not just an app, it was a philosophy, a way of life I genuinely believed could make a difference. I poured my heart, my soul, and every spare minute I had into it. My apartment became a war room, cluttered with whiteboards covered in flowcharts, sticky notes detailing user journeys, and mock-ups sketched on every available surface. Sleep was a luxury I could not afford, fueled instead by an unwavering conviction that this idea, this vision, was going to change things. And then there was Liam. Liam was my best friend, or so I thought. We had known each other since we were kids, through scraped knees and awkward teenage years, through college dorm rooms filled with instant noodles and big dreams. He was the brother I never had, the one who always had my back, the one I trusted implicitly, without question, without hesitation. He was charismatic, a natural networker, a master of making connections, while I was the architect, the meticulous builder of systems and algorithms. Liam was the face, the voice, the one who could walk into any room and charm everyone within minutes. It felt like a perfect partnership, a yin and yang of entrepreneurial spirit. He had a knack for sales, for translating complex technical ideas into compelling narratives that people could immediately grasp. I imagined us, side by side, building an empire, not just for ourselves, but for a greater good. Our shared history, the countless hours spent discussing our futures, the dreams we spun together over cheap beer and late-night pizza, all contributed to an unbreakable bond, or so I believed. I remember the day I first showed him the full scope of the project. It was a Saturday, the sun streaming into my cramped living room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I had spent the entire night polishing the presentation, a digital walkthrough of the platform, complete with animated user interfaces and a detailed business plan outlining market penetration strategies and revenue models. My hands were shaking a little as I clicked the first slide. He sat on my worn sofa, eyes wide, leaning forward with an intensity that made my chest swell with pride. As I talked, explaining every feature, every nuance, every potential impact, he interrupted with excited exclamations, with insightful questions that showed he was truly grasping the magnitude of what we were creating. His enthusiasm was infectious. It mirrored my own, amplifying it, making the dream feel even more tangible, more real. He told me it was brilliant, a game changer, something that would redefine how local businesses operated. His words were a balm to my exhausted soul, a confirmation that all the sleepless nights, all the sacrifices were worth it. He suggested we partner formally, that he handle the business development, the investor pitches, the public face of the company, while I continued to refine the technology, to build out the core infrastructure. It made perfect sense. His skills complemented mine in every way. We shook hands, not just on a business deal, but on a shared future, a mutual commitment to this vision. The trust between us felt absolute, immutable. We spent weeks, then months, working side by side. I granted him full administrative access to all the development servers, the code repositories, the marketing materials, the financial projections. He had access to every single document, every single line of thought, every single piece of intellectual property I had generated. We even shared a single, highly secure cloud drive where everything, absolutely everything, was stored. It was a testament to our bond, to the absolute faith I placed in him. There were no secrets between us, no hidden agendas, or so I thought. We crafted the investor deck together, meticulously refining every slide, every word. I poured my technical expertise into the details, ensuring the feasibility was undeniable, while Liam polished the narrative, making it compelling, irresistible. We rehearsed our pitch countless times in front of a mirror, critiquing each other, pushing each other to be better. We dreamed big, sketching out expansion plans, imagining our platform in cities across the globe. The future felt bright, limitless. We were on the cusp of something extraordinary. We had several meetings lined up with venture capitalists, some big names, the kind of investors who could turn our dream into a multi-million-dollar reality overnight. The first meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday. I remember the date vividly. It was supposed to be our moment, the culmination of all our hard work, our shared vision finally taking flight. The betrayal, when it came, was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, insidious creep. It began subtly, with Liam becoming a little more distant, a little harder to reach. He would miss calls, reschedule meetings, offer vague excuses. At first, I brushed it off. Startups are chaotic, I told myself. He is probably just swamped with investor outreach. I trusted him, remember? That trust was been so thoroughly outmaneuvered, so completely underestimated, was a bitter pill to swallow. The anger, which had been a simmering ember, began to flare into a cold, hard resolve. I understood now that confronting him directly would be a waste of energy, a futile gesture against a mind that had anticipated every possible move. My fight would not be in the open, not yet. It would be in the shadows, a strategic counteroffensive built on patience and observation. I found myself retreating, not just from the company, but from much of my public life. I needed to disappear, to become invisible, to observe the full extent of the damage he intended to inflict. This was not a retreat born of defeat, but of strategic necessity. I needed to understand the full scope of his operation, the precise mechanisms he employed, the people he brought into his orbit, and the vulnerabilities he presented. He had meticulously studied me. Now I would return the favor, with an added layer of personal motivation he could not possibly have accounted for. My days became a blur of quiet observation and meticulous data gathering. I set up alerts for every mention of Chimera, every news article, every industry report. I tracked their client acquisitions, their hiring patterns, their public statements. I analyzed their service offerings, looking for the cracks in their polished facade, the areas where their promises might outstrip their capabilities. I became a ghost in the machine, an unseen spectator to the destruction he wrought, meticulously documenting each step of his parasitic rise. The loneliness was a constant companion. The betrayal had cut deep, not just professionally, but personally. It was a reminder of the fragility of trust, the deceptive nature of appearances. Yet, amidst the isolation, a new kind of strength began to coalesce. It was the strength of absolute clarity, of having nothing left to lose, and everything to fight for. My anger transformed into a focused determination, a cold fire that burned steadily. He had believed my departure would create a vacuum he could exploit. He was right. But he had not accounted for the nature of that vacuum. It was not an empty space, but a void waiting to be filled with something new, something unexpected. He had planned for my dismantling, for my network to be scattered, for my influence to wane. But he had not planned for my metamorphosis. He had seen me as a static entity, predictable in my reactions. He had failed to account for the resilience born of betrayal, the cunning forged in the fires of professional annihilation. Chimera, in his mind, was a phoenix rising from our ashes. But true phoenixes rise from their own destruction, renewed and transformed. His entity was a scavenger, feasting on the remains of something it had deliberately killed. There was a fundamental difference, a moral chasm between the two, and that, I knew, would ultimately be his undoing. He had built his empire on deceit and manipulation, and such foundations, no matter how meticulously laid, always contained inherent weaknesses. My task was to find them, to understand them, and to exploit them when the time was right. This was no longer just about reclaiming what was lost. It was about exposing the truth, about ensuring that his parasitic phoenix would never truly take flight. The game was far from over. It had only just begun. And this time, I would be playing by my own rules. The declaration hung in the air of my small, temporary apartment, a silent vow etched into the very fabric of my being. Playing by my own rules. It was a potent thought, one that resonated with a dangerous freedom I hadn't felt in years. The corporate cage, even one I had helped build, had always imposed its strictures. Now, those were gone. My canvas was blank, my tools unconventional, my objective singular. The immediate aftermath of that epiphany was not a flurry of activity, but a deep, almost meditative stillness. I spent days sifting through the wreckage of my past, not for nostalgic reasons, but for salvageable intelligence. My personal devices had been wiped clean, my corporate access revoked, my digital footprint meticulously erased by Victor's people. He was thorough, I gave him that. But thoroughness often bred complacency, a belief that all loose ends were tied. He had forgotten one crucial detail. I was a master of observation, a collector of minutiae, and my memory, unlike a hard drive, could not be formatted. I began with the periphery. Publicly available data, the kind anyone could access if they knew where to look and what to look for. Chimera's recent press releases, their burgeoning stock reports, Victor's carefully curated interviews. He painted a picture of a visionary, a disruptor who had gracefully acquired a struggling entity and transformed it into a powerhouse. The narrative was slick, seamless, and utterly false. I cross-referenced dates, names, product launches. The speed of Chimera's expansion was unnerving, almost impossible for a company built from scratch in such a short time, even with a substantial cash injection. It suggested a pre-existing infrastructure, a network already in place, waiting to be activated. My old company had been the final piece, not the foundation. My first tangible lead came from an obscure financial filing. A shell corporation, registered offshore, had made a series of high-value, low-profile investments in Chimera's early stages. The amounts were significant enough to provide initial capital, but small enough individually to avoid drawing undue attention. The name of the shell company was a bland, generic sequence of letters and numbers, but the registered agent, a legal firm in a country known for its opacity, was one I recognized. It had handled some of Victor's personal trusts years ago, before his ambition had consumed him entirely. A subtle thread, easily missed, but to me it glowed like a beacon. It confirmed what I suspected. Victor had been planning this for a very long time, meticulously, laying the groundwork for his parasitic takeover, even while he was still my partner, still smiling across the conference table. This wasn't just about IP theft or a hostile takeover. This was premeditated corporate assassination. That realization sharpened my resolve, hardening the edges of my burgeoning strategy. I needed more than just public records. I needed to peer behind the curtain, to understand the true nature of Chimera's growth. And for that, I needed help, not from anyone who knew me as I was, the CEO, the public face. I needed someone who operated in the shadows, someone who understood how to extract information without leaving a trace. My thoughts drifted to Elias Thorne. Elias was a ghost in the machine, a former colleague from my early days in tech, before I had ascended to the executive suites. He was brilliant, eccentric, and possessed a deeply ingrained distrust of authority and large corporations. He had left our previous company under a cloud of suspicion, accused of unauthorized data access, though I always suspected he was merely too clever for the security protocols of the time. He had vanished from the mainstream, carving out a niche as a digital forensics expert for hire, specializing in untraceable data recovery and discrete information gathering. He worked for cash, asked few questions, and was fiercely loyal to those he deemed worthy. Our paths hadn't crossed in years, but I had a burner phone and a memory of a coded message he once told me to use if I ever truly needed to disappear, or needed someone else to. The message was cryptic, a sequence of numbers tied to a forgotten online forum, a relic from the early internet. It took me a full day to decode, to navigate the layers of encryption and dead drops. When I finally sent the message, a simple 3-word phrase, "Shadow needs light," I felt a tremor of anticipation. Elias was a risk. He was unpredictable, but he was exactly the kind of asset I now needed. He wouldn't care about my past title or my current ignominy. He would only care about the challenge, and perhaps the inherent injustice of the situation. While I waited for a response from Elias, I began to re-establish my own operational security. My old life had been one of open doors and public personas. My new one demanded anonymity. I acquired a new set of disposable phones, established encrypted communication channels, and began to move between a series of short-term rentals, always paying in cash. I learned to blend, to observe, to become invisible. The world, I realized, was full of blind spots, places where the vigilant eye of corporate surveillance rarely bothered to look. Coffee shops with weak Wi-Fi, forgotten libraries, bustling markets where faces blurred into a nameless crowd. Days later, a single encrypted email arrived on my burner phone. The sender was an anonymous address, the subject line, a string of random characters. The body contained a PYGIDS, single coordinate and a time. Elias. He was in. The location was a dimly lit, nondescript bar in a part of the city Victor would never frequent, a place that smelled of stale beer and forgotten dreams. Perfect. I arrived early, dressed in clothes that helped me fade into the background. I ordered a cheap whiskey and found a booth in the corner, facing the entrance. Elias, when he arrived, was exactly as I remembered him. Wiry, with a shock of perpetually unkempt dark hair, eyes that darted with an almost inhuman speed, constantly scanning, processing. He wore a faded band t-shirt and jeans, a stark contrast to the tailored suits I had grown accustomed to. He recognized me instantly, despite my more subdued appearance. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched his lips as he slid into the opposite seat. "You look like hell," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "But the fire in your eyes is new. I like it." I skipped the pleasantries. "I need your help, Elias. I need to know everything about Chimera, everything Victor is hiding." He leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "That's a big ask. Victor's got layers. He's careful. He's arrogant," I countered. "He thinks he's invisible. He thinks he's untouchable." "That's where he's wrong. He thinks he tied up every loose end. He forgot about the ones he didn't know existed." Elias chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "And you're one of those. A very sharp, loose end. What's the play? Revenge? Justice," I corrected, my voice firm. "And truth. He didn't just steal my company, Elias. He built his empire on a lie, a fundamental rottenness. I need to expose it." He studied me for a long moment, those sharp eyes seeming to bore into my very core. He wasn't looking for emotion. He was looking for conviction, for the unshakable will that drove me. He found it. "All right," he finally said, pushing a small, encrypted tablet across the table. "This is how we communicate. No phones, no public networks. I'll need access to whatever you've got. Old files, internal communications, anything that might have slipped through Victor's net. The more obscure, the better. And cash. My rates have gone up since I last saw you." I nodded. "Agreed. I have a few things. Nothing digital, all hard copy, buried deep. and the cash will be wired through a series of untraceable transactions. Good. He picked up his drink, a dark beer. What specifically are we looking for? Beyond the general rottenness. Give me a target. I paused, thinking. His expansion, the speed of it. It's too fast. And the initial funding for Chimera, before my company was acquired, I have a lead on a shell corporation, a legal firm in the Cayman Islands. Start there, see if you can trace the money. And look for anything unusual in their data acquisition practices. Any shortcuts, any ethical corners cut. Victor always had a knack for finding the loopholes. Now, I suspect he's just bulldozing through the law. Elias nodded slowly, absorbing the information. He was already processing, his mind a whirlwind of algorithms and data pathways. This is going to be fun, he said, a genuine, if slightly manic smile touching his lips. Just like old times. It was not like old times. Not at all. This was darker. More dangerous. But Elias was right about one thing. The challenge, the intellectual sparring, the pursuit of a hidden truth, it felt exhilarating in a way my old corporate life never had. I was no longer a CEO, bogged down by board meetings and investor calls. I was a hunter. Over the next few weeks, Elias and I established a rhythm. Our communication was sparse, precise, and always encrypted. He worked from his hidden digital lair, a place he never disclosed, while I moved through the physical world, a ghost in my own city. I delved into my memory, pulling forth fragments of conversations, long-forgotten documents, names of obscure contacts, anything that could provide Elias with a starting point, a thread to tug. I remembered a peculiar incident years ago, long before Chimera was even a whisper. Victor had been obsessed with a nascent AI project from a small, independent research lab. He had pushed hard for an acquisition, but the lab had refused, fiercely protective of their intellectual property. Victor had dropped the matter eventually, or so I thought, but a detail resurfaced in my mind. A casual comment he made about the difficulty of protecting proprietary algorithms when the right incentive was applied. At the time, I dismissed it as typical Victor bluster. Now it echoed with a sinister resonance. I relayed this to Elias, along with the name of the research lab, long since defunct. He promised to look into it. A few days later, a report landed on my encrypted tablet. Elias had found traces. The independent lab had indeed been targeted. Not by Victor directly, but by a network of shell companies and offshore entities that eventually funneled their assets, including the AI's core algorithms, into a then-unknown entity called Chimera. The transactions were convoluted, designed to obscure the true beneficiary, but Elias, with his digital bloodhound instincts, had followed the scent. The paper trail led directly to the same legal firm in the Cayman Islands I had initially identified. This was more than just IP theft. This was a pattern. A systematic acquisition of cutting-edge technology, not through legitimate means, but through corporate espionage, coercion, and outright theft, laundered through a sophisticated network of intermediaries. Chimera wasn't innovating. It was absorbing, digesting, and rebranding stolen genius. The parasitic phoenix wasn't just feeding on my company, it had been feeding for years. The implications were staggering. If Victor had built Chimera on a foundation of stolen intellectual property, using these illicit means, then the entire edifice was vulnerable. One major exposure could bring the whole thing crashing down. But exposing it would require irrefutable proof, a chain of evidence so robust that even Victor's army of lawyers couldn't dismantle it. My focus shifted. It wasn't enough to just find the stolen IP. I needed to understand how it was being used, how it was integrated into Chimera's products, and how its true origins were being concealed. This meant getting closer to the heart of Chimera itself, a dangerous proposition. Meanwhile, Victor wasn't idle. Chimera's public profile continued to soar. They announced a new round of funding, valuing the company at astronomical figures. Victor gave interviews, speaking eloquently about ethical AI and responsible innovation, his words a bitter mockery of the truth I was unearthing. He even launched a philanthropic initiative, a foundation dedicated to fostering young tech talent, a blatant attempt to whitewash his image and project an aura of benevolent leadership. It was infuriating, but also illuminating. His arrogance was growing, his confidence in his untouchability solidifying. This was precisely the weakness I needed to exploit. One evening, while reviewing financial statements Elias had painstakingly pieced together from various public and semi-public databases, I noticed an anomaly. A significant portion of Chimera's revenue was being directed towards a subsidiary I didn't recognize, a company called Aegis Solutions. It was listed as a cybersecurity firm, providing internal protection for Chimera's vast data assets. But the numbers didn't add up. The expenditures far exceeded what a company of Chimera's size would typically allocate for internal security, even a cutting-edge one. And the subsidiary's financial reports were unusually opaque, even for a privately held entity. I flagged it for Elias, Aegis Solutions. Dig deep. I have a bad feeling about this one. His response came swiftly, a single word. Got it. A few days later, Elias's report on Aegis Solutions landed in my inbox, and it was far more disturbing than I had anticipated. Aegis Solutions was indeed a cybersecurity firm, but not just for Chimera. It was a black box operation, a highly specialized entity that provided advanced surveillance and data acquisition services to a select, anonymous clientele. Its primary function, however, appeared to be internal. Elias had found evidence, buried deep within encrypted servers, that Aegis Solutions was actively engaged in monitoring Chimera's own employees, not just for security purposes, but for loyalty, for dissent, for any signs of internal weakness or potential whistleblowers. It was a digital panopticon designed to ensure absolute control and secrecy. Even more chilling was the discovery that Aegis Solutions was also being used to monitor external targets. Elias suspected it was how Victor had initially identified and targeted the independent research labs, how he had tracked and eventually acquired their stolen IP. It was a sophisticated, clandestine intelligence operation, run under the guise of internal security. And the more Elias dug, the more he found evidence that Aegis Solutions wasn't just monitoring, it was actively interfering, manipulating, and even sabotaging. This was the rotten core. This was the true nature of Victor's parasitic phoenix. It wasn't just about stealing technology. It was about stealing privacy, stealing freedom, stealing the very essence of human autonomy. The initial betrayal, the corporate coup, suddenly seemed small in comparison to the vast, unethical web Victor had woven. He wasn't just building an empire, he was building a surveillance state, a digital prison. My own sense of danger escalated. If Aegis Solutions was monitoring Chimera employees, it was undoubtedly monitoring me. Victor would have assumed I was a threat, a loose end to be contained. I doubled down on my operational security, becoming even more meticulous in my movements, my communications. Every interaction, every digital footprint was carefully considered. I felt the invisible tendrils of Aegis Solutions reaching out, a constant, low-level hum of surveillance in the background of my new life. It was a chilling sensation, but it also provided a perverse motivation. I was no longer just fighting for justice, I was fighting for my very freedom. And perhaps for the freedom of others, unknowingly ensnared in Victor's web. I needed to find a way to expose Aegis Solutions without becoming its next victim. Elias suggested a long game. We needed to gather enough irrefutable evidence, a critical mass of data, before making any move. A single isolated leak would be easily dismissed by Victor's PR machine, attributed to a disgruntled former employee or a malicious hacker. We needed a tsunami, a flood of undeniable truth that would overwhelm his defenses. The next phase of our plan involved a deeper infiltration. Elias, from his digital perch, would attempt to gain a more direct, albeit highly covert, access to Aegis Solutions' internal systems. Not to disrupt them, not to destroy them, but to observe, to collect, to understand their methods, their targets, their vulnerabilities. My role, meanwhile, would be to cultivate external contacts. Individuals who might have been impacted by Aegis Solutions, operations. People who had a reason to speak out, but lacked the means or the courage to do so. I needed to build a coalition of the wronged, a chorus of voices to amplify the truth once it was ready to be revealed. This was a dangerous dance. Victor was powerful, well-connected, and utterly ruthless. He had proven his willingness to destroy lives to achieve his aims. But he had underestimated me. He had underestimated the resilience born of betrayal, the cunning forged in the fires of professional annihilation. He had built his empire on deceit and manipulation, and such foundations, no matter how meticulously laid, always contained inherent weaknesses. My task was to find them, to understand them, and to exploit them when the time was right. I began with what I knew best: data. Not the kind Aegis trafficked in, but the public record, the digital footprint Victor and his empire left behind. Every company Aegis acquired, every high-profile client they served, every legal battle they engaged in, all of it was a potential thread to pull. I scoured financial reports, news archives, corporate registries, looking for anomalies, sudden leadership changes, unexplained stock plunges, businesses that vanished without a trace after a reported interaction with Aegis Solutions. It was like sifting through a vast, murky ocean, searching for specific, almost invisible currents. My first target was a pharmaceutical startup, Genomics Labs. They had been on the cusp of a major breakthrough in personalized medicine, attracting significant venture capital and garnering industry buzz. Then, abruptly, their lead scientist was accused of fraud, their core intellectual property was challenged in court by a shadowy shell corporation, and the company imploded, acquired for pennies on the dollar by Aegis Solutions. It was too clean, too perfect. The kind of corporate takedown that left no fingerprints, only a lingering scent of sulfur. My initial dive into Genomics Labs was like peeling back layers of an onion, each one revealing a carefully constructed facade. The lead scientist, Dr. Eris Thorne, was a brilliant but notoriously private man. The fraud accusations against him stemmed from an anonymous tip to a financial watchdog group alleging falsified clinical trial data. The subsequent legal challenge to their intellectual property, specifically a groundbreaking gene editing sequence, came from a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, its ownership obscured behind layers of offshore trusts. What caught my eye, however, was the timing. The anonymous tip, the lawsuit, the sudden drop in investor confidence, it all happened within a tight 3-month window, just as Genomics was preparing for its Series C funding round, which would have valued them in the billions. And then, like a vulture circling a dying animal, Aegis Solutions swooped in, acquiring the shattered remnants of Genomics for a fraction of its projected worth. The official narrative painted Aegis as a savior, salvaging valuable research from a failing enterprise, but the documents told a different story. I cross-referenced the names involved. The law firm representing the Shell Corporation in the IP dispute had a history of working with Aegis on other, less public matters. The financial watchdog group that received the anonymous tip had, coincidentally, just received a substantial donation from a charitable foundation linked to one of Aegis Solutions' subsidiary holding companies. It was a web of indirect connections, designed to be untraceable, yet when you laid them all out, the pattern was undeniable. Aegis wasn't just acquiring companies, it was orchestrating their downfall. Genomics Labs was just the first thread. I went deeper, pulling at other names on the list I had compiled from Aegis's acquisition history. There was a robotics firm, Automata Dynamics, that had developed a revolutionary AI for industrial automation. Their CEO, a visionary engineer, was embroiled in a very public and messy divorce, fueled by salacious leaks to the tabloids, just before a critical investor presentation. The divorce proceedings paralyzed the company, and the CEO eventually resigned under pressure, selling his controlling stake to a private equity firm that, a few months later, flipped it to Aegis Solutions. Again, the timing was too precise. The leaks, the subsequent legal battles, the engineered chaos. It all felt like a playbook. Then there was Solara Energy, a renewable energy startup that had perfected a highly efficient solar cell. Their facilities suffered a series of mysterious industrial accidents, leading to production delays and massive insurance claims. Investigations pointed to equipment malfunction, but dissenting voices within the company, quickly silenced, whispered of sabotage. Solara's stock plummeted, their reputation tarnished, and Aegis was there to pick up the pieces, rebranding their technology as proprietary and integrating it into their own energy portfolio. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Victor wasn't just a corporate raider, he was a corporate assassin. He didn't just buy out competitors. He systematically dismantled them from the inside out, using a combination of legal pressure, character assassination, financial manipulation, and sometimes, it seemed, outright sabotage. His network of shell corporations, PR firms, law offices, and even shadowy private investigators was vast and meticulously coordinated. It was a masterpiece of corporate warfare, executed with surgical precision, leaving behind a trail of ruined lives and broken dreams, all disguised as unfortunate business failures. I started building a timeline for each target company. The pattern was always the same. First, a period of rapid growth and innovation, making them attractive targets. Second, the initiation of a destabilization campaign, a key executive scandal, a devastating lawsuit, a public smear campaign, or a series of operational setbacks. Third, a rapid decline in valuation and investor confidence. Fourth, the Aegis acquisition, often through an intermediary or a shell company, usually at a fire sale price. My office became a war room. Walls were covered in flowcharts, sticky notes, and printed documents, tracing the connections between entities, the timelines of events. The air grew thick with the scent of stale coffee and the hum of my servers. Sleep became a luxury, replaced by short, fitful naps on the worn leather couch. My phone was on silent, notifications off. I was in a bubble, shielded from the outside world, deep in the rabbit hole of Victor's empire. I needed to find a human connection. Someone who had lived through this. Someone who could corroborate what the documents hinted at. Dr. Eris Thorne, the genomic scientist, seemed like the logical first step. After his public disgrace, he had vanished from the scientific community. His university position was terminated, his research grants pulled. He was a ghost. Finding him wasn't easy. He had deliberately erased his digital footprint, a testament to the trauma he had endured. But I was good at this. Better than good. I had learned from the best and the worst. It took me 3 weeks of digging, using old academic directories, obscure professional forums, and even a contact from my past life, who specialized in locating the truly off-grid. I found him in a small, isolated cabin in rural Vermont, living under an assumed name, tinkering with old electronics. A broken man. I drove up there on a cold, drizzly Tuesday morning, the kind of weather that mirrored the mood of my investigation. The cabin was rustic, nestled deep in a forest, smoke curling from its stone chimney. He answered the door warily, his eyes shadowed, his frame thinner than I remembered from his old photos. I introduced myself, carefully, explaining that I wasn't there to accuse or to judge, but to understand. I showed him a printout of the genomics timeline I had assembled, the connections I had drawn. His initial reaction was a mix of shock and suspicion. He listened in silence, his gaze flitting from my face to the documents. When I finished, he sighed, a deep rattling sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "You're right," he said, his voice raspy, barely above a whisper. "It wasn't fraud, it was a setup. They knew everything. My research, my weaknesses, my family. They exploited every single vulnerability." He told me about the anonymous threats, the strange emails, the subtle manipulations that eroded his trust in his own team. He recounted how his estranged brother, a minor gambler, had suddenly found himself in deep debt to a loan shark, and how the loan shark had offered a solution: a few discreet pieces of information about Thorne's confidential research, just enough to sow doubt. He spoke of the fabricated evidence planted in his lab, the carefully timed leaks to the press that painted him as a reckless charlatan. They didn't want my research, he explained. They wanted to break me, to make sure no one else could finish what I started. And they succeeded. He looked out at the rain-swept forest, his eyes distant. I lost everything. My work, my reputation, my wife. My life. His story was heartbreaking, but it was also a crucial piece of the puzzle. It confirmed my suspicions. Victor wasn't just about financial gain. He was about control, about eliminating any potential threat to his burgeoning empire. Genomics Labs, Automata Dynamics, Solara Energy. These weren't just companies, they were innovators, disruptors. They represented new paradigms, new ways of doing things that could challenge the established order, an order Victor was meticulously building. I spent hours with Thorne, recording his testimony, cross-referencing details with my own findings. He provided names, dates, and subtle clues that only someone on the inside would know. He described the shell corporation that challenged Genomics' IP not as a legal entity, but as a network of individuals who seemed to anticipate every move Genomics made. He identified a specific lawyer, a specialist in intellectual property, who always seemed to be on the opposing side in these cases, yet always seemed to lose just enough to weaken the target, never enough to expose himself. Leaving Thorne, I felt a renewed sense of purpose, but also a chilling realization. Victor wasn't just a businessman, he was a puppet master, pulling strings in the shadows, orchestrating the downfall of entire industries, one company at a time. The public saw a shrewd investor, a visionary entrepreneur, a blindfold, a heavy velvet curtain obscuring the truth. Then came the first real tremor, a ripple of unease. I was checking our shared calendar, looking for an update on the upcoming investor meetings, and I noticed a curious entry. A meeting with a prominent VC firm, one we had been targeting for months, but it was scheduled under Liam's name alone. No invitation for me, my stomach dropped. It was probably just an oversight, I reasoned, a scheduling error. He would explain it, he always did. I called him immediately. He answered, his voice a little too breezy, a little too casual. I asked about the meeting. He stammered, mumbled something about a preliminary chat, just laying the groundwork, nothing important. He said he would fill me in later. The explanation felt flimsy, like a cheap curtain trying to hide a gaping hole. But I still wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe in our friendship, in our partnership. The idea that Liam, my Liam, could be anything but loyal was anathema to me. It was like questioning the sun rising. The real shock came a week later. I was browsing a tech news site, sipping my morning coffee, still trying to shake off the lingering sense of unease. And there it was, splashed across the homepage, a headline announcing a new startup, a revolutionary local commerce platform, securing a substantial seed round of funding. The name of the company was unfamiliar, but the description was sickeningly familiar. It was my idea. Every single core feature, every unique selling proposition, every fundamental aspect of the platform I had meticulously crafted was laid out in agonizing detail. And the founder, Liam. His face, beaming, confident, was right there next to the article. My coffee cup slipped from my grasp, shattering on the kitchen floor, the dark liquid spreading like an ugly stain. The world tilted. The air left my lungs in a ragged gasp. It was not just a similar idea. It was a me idea, stolen, repackaged, and presented as his own. The article even quoted him, using phrases that were direct echoes of our investor pitch. words I had helped craft, concepts I had originated. The sheer audacity, the cold calculation of it, hit me like a physical blow. My best friend, the person I had shared everything with, had not just betrayed me, he had systematically dismantled our shared dream and rebuilt it under his own banner, leaving me in the dust. The pain was sharp, immediate, a searing wound that went straight to the core of my being. Disbelief warred with a rising tide of white-hot fury. How could he? How could he do this to me, to us? I tried to call him, of course. My fingers trembled as I dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. I called again and again. Nothing. I sent him a barrage of texts, increasingly desperate, then increasingly angry. Why? How? What about us? What about... Saw a predator. My next step was to dig deeper into the legal side of things. The recurring lawyer Thorne mentioned, a Mr. Elias Vance. Vance had a spotless public record, a reputation for being a formidable but ethical IP attorney. But my research revealed a pattern. Vance frequently represented smaller, lesser-known entities in complex IP disputes against innovative startups. These entities often settled for less than ideal terms, but the settlements invariably crippled the target company, making them ripe for acquisition. And in a surprising number of those cases, the acquiring company, directly or indirectly, was Aegis Solutions. It was a subtle form of legal warfare. Vance's clients would launch a seemingly legitimate IP challenge, tying up the target in expensive litigation, draining their resources, and diverting their focus. Even if Vance's clients eventually lost or settled, the damage was done. The target was weakened, their innovation stalled, their investor confidence shattered. And then, Victor's shadow would fall. I started building a dossier on Vance. His financial records, his personal connections, everything. It was a tedious process, but the more I dug, the more cracks I found in his pristine facade. There were inexplicable cash injections into his personal accounts, offshore accounts linked to his family members, and a luxurious lifestyle that seemed to far exceed his declared income from his law firm. It all pointed to a quid pro quo. Vance was being paid to facilitate Aegis's corporate assassinations. The more I uncovered, the more I felt a growing sense of dread. This wasn't just about money for Victor. It was about power. And not just economic power, but something deeper, something that felt almost ideological. He wasn't just acquiring companies. He was acquiring futures. He was systematically absorbing the most innovative technologies, the most disruptive ideas, the very engines of progress. Why? To control the market? To monopolize innovation? Or was there something else, something far more sinister, lurking beneath the surface? The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. I had identified dozens of such cases, each one a testament to Victor's ruthless efficiency. He wasn't just picking off low-hanging fruit, he was targeting the most promising, the most dangerous to the status quo. What status quo? His own, I presumed. He was building an empire that controlled the future of medicine, robotics, energy, information technology. I decided to try and find other victims. It was a risk, contacting people who had been publicly disgraced or financially ruined. They were wary, often paranoid, and deeply traumatized. But Thorne's story gave me a template. I approached them with empathy, with evidence, and with a clear explanation of what I was trying to do. Slowly, painstakingly, I started to build a network of those who had been touched by Victor's shadow. There was Sarah Chen, the CEO of Automata Dynamics. She was living in self-imposed exile in Bali, trying to piece her life back together after the tabloid scandal and the forced resignation. Her ex-husband, she confessed, had been approached by a discreet intermediary who offered a substantial sum for compromising information. He had been struggling financially, and the temptation was too great. He hadn't known the true scope of what he was getting into, only that it would hurt Sarah. The intermediary was never identified, but the pattern was identical to Thorne's story. There was also David Miller, the head engineer at Solara Energy. He confirmed the whispers of sabotage, describing how a disgruntled former employee, known to have gambling debts, had been rehired just weeks before the first industrial accident. That employee vanished shortly after the acquisition. Miller had tried to raise concerns, but his voice was drowned out by the official investigations and the pressure from investors. Each new testimony solidified the picture. Victor had a dedicated, covert operation designed to destabilize and acquire. He exploited human weakness, greed, resentment, desperation, to achieve his ends. He didn't just buy companies, he broke them first. The realization hit me hard. This wasn't just corporate espionage. This was a systematic dismantling of independent innovation. Victor wasn't just building an empire. He was building a monopoly on the future. He was consolidating control over the technologies that would define the next century. The question that gnawed at me was why. What was the ultimate goal? Pure profit, on this scale, seemed insufficient as a sole motivator. There was an ideological fervor to it, a cold, calculating desire to shape the world according to his own design. I started looking for connections between the acquired companies themselves, beyond just the Aegis acquisition. Was there a common thread in their technologies? Genomics Labs, Automata Dynamics, Solara Energy, a bioinformatics firm, a quantum computing startup. They all represented cutting-edge, potentially disruptive technologies. Technologies that could revolutionize society, or, in the wrong hands, control it. The deeper I went, the more dangerous it felt. I was no longer just a ghost in the machine. I was actively digging into Victor's most closely guarded secrets. I started taking precautions. My digital security was already top tier, but I added more layers, randomized my browsing patterns, used burner phones for sensitive communications. I even changed my routines, varied my routes, always checking my rearview mirror. Paranoia or prudence? In this game, the line blurred. One evening, I found something truly unsettling. A seemingly innocuous clause buried deep within the acquisition papers of a small data analytics firm Aegis had acquired 5 years prior. It wasn't about patents or assets, but about access. Aegis had acquired perpetual, irrevocable access to all data processed by the firm, including historical archives and future data streams. This firm specialized in predictive modeling, using vast data sets to forecast market trends, political shifts, even individual behavior patterns. It was a small detail, easily overlooked, but its implications were enormous. Victor wasn't just buying technology, he was buying information. He was buying the ability to see the future, or at least to influence it, combined with the gene editing capabilities of genomics, the advanced AI of Automata Dynamics, the energy solutions of Solara, and other acquisitions I was now tracing. A terrifying picture began to emerge. He was building a system, a self-sustaining, self-improving system of control. With predictive analytics, he could anticipate market shifts and political unrest. With advanced AI and robotics, he could automate industries and control labor. With gene editing, he could influence health and even human potential. With energy solutions, he could power it all. Victor wasn't just a shrewd businessman. He was an architect of a new world order, operating entirely outside the purview of governments or public scrutiny. He was building the tools of absolute control, one broken company at a time. The thought sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold air seeping in through the old windows of my office. This wasn't just about exposing a corrupt mogul. This was about stopping a fundamental shift in the balance of power, a shift that could render democracy, individual freedom, and even human agency obsolete. My personal vendetta against Victor had morphed into something far larger, far more urgent. I wasn't just seeking justice for my past, I was fighting for a future that hadn't yet been entirely stolen. The next step was clear. I needed to find the central node, the core of this vast, interconnected web. It wasn't just the individual companies or the shell corporations. There had to be a nexus, a central brain coordinating all these disparate operations. And I had a strong suspicion where that brain was located. It was the one piece of the puzzle that had always been hidden in plain sight, the very core of Aegis Solutions itself, beyond the public-facing image. The part that Victor guarded most fiercely. The part that no one ever talked about. It was time to stop sifting through the debris of his conquests and start looking at the fortress he had built. I knew it would be dangerous, perhaps even suicidal, but I also knew I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the stakes were this high. The battle wasn't just for my soul anymore. It was for everything. I took a deep breath. The stale air of my office suddenly charged with a new, terrifying resolve. The fight was just beginning, and I intended to win. The blueprint for my next move wasn't a corporate strategy document or a leaked email chain. It was a feeling, a cold certainty that had settled deep in my bones. Victor wasn't just a businessman. He was an architect of fate, and his central node would be nothing less than his personal Olympus. My first step had to be a deep dive into the physical and digital architecture of Aegis Solutions beyond its public facade. I needed to understand the layers of protection, the redundant systems, the very heartbeat of his empire. I started with the periphery, using old contacts and ghost accounts to scrape data from obscure forums, dark web marketplaces, and even academic papers that touched on advanced network security and predictive analytics. Victor was a pioneer in many fields, and his infrastructure would reflect that. I mapped out known server locations, data centers, and even the obscure subsidiaries that handled Aegis's most sensitive computational tasks. It was like peeling an onion, layer after invisible layer. The more I peeled, the more the core seemed to recede, protected by a haze of encrypted data and legal firewalls. The office became my war room. Screens glowed with network topologies, satellite images of anonymous industrial parks, and timelines of Victor's major acquisitions overlaid with global events. I was looking for anomalies, for the places where the data seemed to converge or diverge unexpectedly. Every piece of information was a thread, and I was trying to weave them into a coherent picture of Victor's true operational heart. The air grew heavy with the smell of stale coffee and my own growing paranoia. I felt Victor's presence, not as a physical threat, but as an omnipresent digital shadow. Every keystroke felt monitored, every search query a potential beacon. I knew he had the resources to track me, to anticipate my moves. The question wasn't if he knew I was looking, but when he would choose to acknowledge it. This wasn't just a hunt. It was a chess game with unseen pieces, and I was playing against a grandmaster. My initial digital probes were cautious, almost imperceptible. I used a network of proxies and anonymizers, bouncing my signals across continents, trying to map the unseen pathways of Aegis's internal networks. I was looking for a backdoor, a forgotten port, a vulnerability that even Victor's formidable security teams might have overlooked. But Aegis's systems were a fortress. Every attempt to gain even a foothold was met with immediate, silent resistance. Firewalls hardened, intrusion detection systems hummed, and honeypots lured my digital probes into dead ends. It was clear that a direct digital assault was a fool's errand. Victor had anticipated everything. I needed an inside track, a human element. Victor's empire was vast, but it was still run by people, and people were fallible. They had secrets, grievances, and sometimes a conscience. I began to review lists of former Aegis employees, particularly those who had worked in highly specialized or secretive departments: data architects, systems engineers, AI ethicists, who had suddenly vanished from the company's public roster. I cross-referenced these names with public records, social media profiles, and professional networks, searching for any hint of discontent, any whisper of a reason they might be willing to talk. It was a slow, painstaking process. Many had signed ironclad non-disclosure agreements. Others had simply disappeared from the public eye, their lives seemingly reset by Aegis's pervasive influence. but one name kept resurfacing in my searches: Lena Petrova. She had been a lead data scientist in Aegis's Advanced Analytics division, a brilliant mind known for her work in predictive modeling. She had left Aegis abruptly 3 years ago, citing personal reasons, but the whispers in the tech community suggested a more contentious departure. There were rumors of ethical disagreements, of projects that pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable. Finding Lena was harder than I expected. She had scrubbed her digital footprint clean, a ghost in the machine she had once helped build. It took weeks of digging, following faint digital breadcrumbs through encrypted forums and niche academic circles, before I found a single, anonymous post on a forum discussing AI ethics. The post, made under a pseudonym, expressed profound disillusionment with the direction of corporate AI development, hinting at a loss of human agency. The language, the specific technical jargon, it felt like Lena. I used a burner phone and an untraceable email address to send a carefully worded message to the pseudonymous account. I didn't mention Aegis or Victor directly. I simply spoke of a shared concern for the ethical implications of advanced data systems, a need to understand the true cost of predictive power. It was a fishing expedition, a shot in the dark, but it was all I had. Days turned into a week, then 2. I half expected my message to be ignored, or worse, to trigger an alarm in Victor's network. But then, a reply. Short, cryptic, asking for proof of my genuine intent. I sent back a piece of obscure technical data, a detail about a specific algorithm used in Aegis's early predictive models that only an insider would know. It was a gamble, revealing a sliver of my own knowledge, but it paid off. A few days later, a new message arrived, this time with a secure, encrypted link and a time. A dead drop in the digital world. I followed the instructions meticulously, using a fresh VM and a secure VPN to access the link. It led to a private chat room, anonymous and untraceable. "Hello," came a text message from Lena's handle. "You know more than you should. So do you," I typed back. "I need to understand what Victor is truly building." There was a long pause. "He is not building," she finally replied. "He is seeing. He is anticipating. He is shaping." My blood ran cold. That was exactly what I suspected. The core wasn't just about data. It was about control, about prescience. "I need to see it," I wrote. "I need to understand how." "Why?" she asked. "Do you think you can stop him?" "No one can stop the inevitable." "Perhaps not," I conceded. "But I can expose it. I can fight for the choice to be made, not dictated." Another long silence. Then, a single word. Oracle. Oracle. The name resonated with an ominous power. It sounded less like a project and more like a deity. "What is Oracle?" I asked. "It is his eye, his mind, his hand," she typed. "It is the central nervous system of everything he controls. It processes more data than any other system on Earth, not just to predict, but to influence. It learns, it adapts, it manipulates." "Where is it?" I pressed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Physically, it is in a facility known only to a handful of people, buried deep beneath Aegis's main research campus in the Nevada desert. Digitally, it is everywhere and nowhere. Its core servers are isolated, air-gapped, but its tendrils reach into every network, every data stream, every public and private domain. It is a closed loop, constantly feeding on the world, and in turn, subtly adjusting its course." I felt a chill, despite the warmth of my office. This was far beyond corporate espionage. This was something out of a dystopian nightmare. "I need to get in," I stated, my voice firm, despite the tremor in my hands. She scoffed, a digital sound effect that conveyed her disbelief. "Impossible. It is protected by multiple layers of biometric security, electromagnetic shielding, and a self-learning AI defense system that is virtually sentient. Even the data streams are encrypted with quantum-resistant algorithms. You cannot brute force your way in. You cannot hack it from the outside." "I know," I replied. But you worked there. You helped build it. There has to be a weakness. Every system has a flaw. She hesitated again, a longer pause this time. The risk is immense. Victor does not tolerate betrayal. He has ways of making people disappear, or wish they had. I understand the risks, I said. I have lived with them for years. What I don't understand is how you live with what you know. That hit a nerve. Her next message was quick, laced with a raw emotion I hadn't heard before. I don't, not really. I left because I saw what it was becoming. I saw the future it was creating, and it terrified me. A future where free will is an illusion, where every choice is subtly nudged, every outcome predetermined. I couldn't be a part of that. Then help me stop it, I urged. Give me a way in. She sent a series of encrypted files. Schematics. Access logs. A bewildering array of technical documents. These are old, she warned. 3 years old. Things change quickly there, but the core architecture, the redundancies, the emergency protocols, those might still hold. Look for Project Chimera. It was my last project before I left. A back door, a failsafe I built in case Oracle ever went truly rogue. I hid it deep within the system, disguised as a diagnostic tool. Chimera. A mythical beast, a hybrid. A perfect name for a hidden vulnerability. This is extremely dangerous, Lena reiterated. If you activate Chimera, it will cause a ripple effect. Oracle will know it has been compromised. Victor will know. I need to be inside, I said, studying the schematics. Physically. Is there a way to bypass the biometric scanners? She sent another file. A sequence of complex algorithms. My biometric data was part of the system when I left, she explained. It was never fully purged. If you can replicate my unique biometric signature, my retinal scan, my voice print, my hand geometry, you might be able to gain temporary access to the outer layers. But the inner sanctum, the core server farm, is different. It requires a specific neural interface, a direct link to the Oracle itself. Only Victor and a select few of his most trusted technicians have that level of access. A neural interface. That was a game changer. It meant more than just bypassing security. It meant interacting directly with Victor's digital brain. I spent the next few weeks immersed in the files Lena provided. Project Chimera was a masterpiece of digital subterfuge, a set of nested protocols designed to create a momentary, exploitable vulnerability within Oracle's formidable defenses. It wasn't a direct shutdown switch, but rather a digital crowbar that could pry open a window, however briefly. The biometric replication was a different beast entirely. I needed specialized equipment, a way to spoof Lena's unique biological markers, with enough precision to fool Aegis's cutting-edge scanners. This would require resources, and a very specific set of skills I didn't possess. I reached out to an old acquaintance, a brilliant but eccentric bioengineer named Dr. Eris Thorne. He was a reclusive genius, known for pushing the boundaries of prosthetic limbs and neural interfaces, often operating in the gray areas of medical ethics. He owed me a favor from years ago, a delicate situation involving a data breach and some incriminating files. Thorne, I said when he finally answered my encrypted call, I need a ghost. A biometric ghost. He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. You always did have a flair for the dramatic. What exactly do you mean by a biometric ghost? I need to replicate a specific set of biometric data, retinal, voice, hand geometry, with enough accuracy to fool a top-tier security system, I explained. And I need it to be temporary, untraceable. He was silent for a moment. That's a tall order, even for me. It's not just about copying. It's about simulating the subtle physiological variations that make each person unique. The microtremors, the specific vocal inflections, the dynamic patterns of blood flow in the retina. This isn't a simple fingerprint spoof, my friend. This is an identity theft at a cellular level. I know, I said. That's why I came to you. he sighed. What's the target? Aegis Solutions. The Oracle Project, I admitted. Another long silence. Aegis. Victor, you're playing with fire, my friend. That man has eyes everywhere. I know, I repeated, my voice steady. Are you in or out? He paused, then let out another dry laugh. The things I do for old debts. All right, send me the parameters. It will take time, and it will cost you. Not money, but a piece of your sanity. This is a rabbit hole, and you might not like what you find at the bottom. I sent him Lena's biometric data parameters, stripped of any identifying information. The wait for Thorne's device was agonizing. Every day felt like a week. I used the time to meticulously plan the infiltration. The Nevada Desert facility was a fortress, but Lena's schematics, combined with publicly available satellite imagery and traffic patterns, revealed a series of tunnels and service ducts beneath the main complex. Not designed for human ingress, but perhaps for maintenance drones or environmental controls. A possible entry point. I also studied the neural interface Lena mentioned. The idea of directly linking my mind to Oracle was terrifying, but it seemed to be the only way to access the deepest layers of Victor's control. I began to research neurohacking, the intersection of brain-computer interfaces and cybersecurity. It was a nascent field, but the implications were profound. If Victor was using such technology, he was operating on a level far beyond anything I had ever encountered. Finally, Thorne delivered. He arrived under cover of darkness, a nondescript package containing a sleek, black gauntlet and a small, almost invisible earpiece. The gauntlet would project the biometric signatures, while the earpiece would modulate my voice. It was a marvel of miniaturized engineering. This will give you a window, he explained, his eyes glinting behind his thick glasses. A very brief window. The system will detect an anomaly, a ghost in the machine, but it should be enough to get you through the initial security layers. But remember, it's a one-shot deal. Once the system flags the spoof, it will lock down. And for the neural interface, he paused. I've included a basic schematic for a direct brain-computer link. It's rudimentary, dangerous, and completely experimental, but it might give you a direct conduit if you can get close enough to a terminal. Be warned, though, Oracle is not just a machine. It thinks. It learns. It might even be aware. His words sent a shiver down my spine. An aware AI. Victor's ultimate weapon. The night of the infiltration was cold and clear, the desert stars blazing overhead. I drove a nondescript vehicle, a rented SUV, far from the Aegis campus, then parked and began the long trek on foot. The facility loomed in the distance, a low, sprawling complex of concrete and steel, indistinguishable from any other high-tech research lab, yet radiating an aura of impenetrable secrecy. I approached from the south, where Lena's schematics indicated a rarely used service tunnel for waste disposal. The air was still, save for the whisper of the wind and the pounding of my own heart. I moved like a shadow, my gear rustling softly against my tactical clothing. Night vision goggles painted the world in shades of green, highlighting the subtle glints of surveillance cameras and motion sensors. The service tunnel entrance was exactly where Lena had marked it, a heavy blast door disguised as part of the rock face. It was secured by a multi-factor lock, a keypad, a retinal scanner, and a voice. Print analyzer. I donned Thorne's gauntlet, the smooth material conforming to my forearm. I activated the earpiece, feeling a subtle hum against my temple. I tapped Lena's biometric code into the keypad. A soft click. Then, I held my eye to the retinal scanner. A beam of red light washed over my iris. The gauntlet projected the intricate patterns of Lena's eye. The scanner whirred, then a green light flashed. Access granted. Next, the voice print. I spoke a pre-programmed phrase in Lena's voice. Modulated. The gauntlet vibrated subtly against my skin, a tiny speaker projecting the synthesized tones. My own throat felt tight, but I focused on the sound, a perfectly replicated stream of Lena's confident, slightly husky voice. The analyzer glowed blue for a moment, then a triumphant green. Access granted. A low, grinding hum began deep within the rock face, growing louder as massive gears engaged. The blast door, a seamless part of the mountain moments ago, shuddered, then slowly began to retract inward, revealing a gaping maw of darkness. A rush of cold, stale air, thick with the scent of ozone and dust, washed over me. My night vision goggles, already engaged, struggled for a moment to adjust to the deeper void beyond, then resolved the scene. A long, perfectly cylindrical tunnel, its walls reinforced with gleaming metal and crisscrossing conduits. The floor was a smooth, polished concrete, marked by faint tire tracks from automated transport vehicles. No movement, no light beyond the pale green glow of my own night vision, no immediate obstacle. Just the vast, empty throat of the mountain. The blast door finished its slow retraction, sealing itself seamlessly into the rock above, the grinding hum fading into a heavy, absolute silence. My breath plumed in the frigid air, a ghost in the green-tinted darkness. I stepped forward, the polished concrete cold and unyielding beneath my boots. Each sound I made seemed magnified. The soft scuff of my sole, the subtle click of my gear, the rhythmic thud of my own heart. The air here was different, not just cold but heavy, carrying a faint metallic tang beneath the ozone and dust, like the aftermath of a lightning strike or a forgotten forge. It was a place of immense power, now dormant. The tire tracks on the floor were wide, deeply set, suggesting heavy machinery. They ran down the center of the tunnel. The tire tracks on the floor were wide, deeply set, suggesting heavy machinery. They ran down the center of the tunnel. I followed them, my headlamp cutting a sharp, focused beam through the oppressive gloom. The concrete floor was almost impossibly smooth, a testament to engineering prowess, but the tire marks carved into it suggested immense weight, not just superficial pressure. They were grooves, not just superficial scuffs. The tunnel itself was a perfect cylinder, or at least a semi-cylinder for the ceiling, carved with precision from the living rock. The walls were a dark, polished stone, almost basaltic in appearance, absorbing all light save for the direct impact of my beam. No seams, no mortar, just a continuous, gleaming surface that felt both ancient and impossibly new. As I walked, the faint metallic tang intensified, mingling now with something else, a dry, dusty scent that reminded me of old laboratories or forgotten machinery. The air grew colder still, a chill that seemed to penetrate my bones, despite the insulated suit. It was a dry, sterile cold, not the damp chill of a natural cave, but something engineered, controlled. My breath plumed before me, a ghostly exhalation in the beam of my headlamp. The silence was profound, broken only by the rhythmic scuff of my boots on the smooth concrete and the faint hum that I now realized wasn't just in my ears, but resonating from the very structure around me. It was a low, almost infrasonic thrum, felt more than heard, a vibration through the soles of my feet that spoke of immense power, dormant but ready. The tire tracks continued, unwavering. They weren't just parallel lines, they were a pair of deeply impressed channels, as if whatever vehicle had made them was not just heavy, but had been melted into the floor, leaving a permanent record. The depth of the grooves was unnerving. This wasn't our friendship? My questions hung unanswered in the digital ether, mocking me with their silence. He had vanished, erased himself from my life with the same ruthlessness he had shown in erasing my contribution to our project. He had not just stolen my intellectual property, he had stolen our entire history, our shared memories, twisting them into a grotesque parody of friendship. The next few days were a blur of grief and rage. I barely ate, barely slept. The anger was a constant companion, a burning ember in my gut. I felt hollowed out, utterly devastated. The future I had envisioned, the one filled with shared success and mutual respect, had evaporated into thin air, replaced by a bitter, empty void. Every corner of my apartment, every line of code on my computer, every crumpled sketch on my desk screamed of his betrayal. I felt foolish, naive, utterly stupid for having trusted him so completely. The shame of my gullibility was almost as painful as the betrayal itself. But amidst the despair, a different kind of feeling slowly began to take root. It was cold, hard, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the feeling of calculation, of a mind shifting gears from grief to strategy. Liam had made a critical error. He had underestimated me. He had assumed that once he had the idea, once he had the funding, I would simply disappear, a forgotten footnote in his triumphant rise. He forgot one crucial detail. I was the architect. I had built everything. And in building everything, I had left my fingerprints everywhere, not just on the code, but deep within the digital infrastructure we had shared. He had taken my idea, but he had also left behind a treasure trove of access, a digital breadcrumb trail leading directly back to his new venture. Remember that shared cloud drive? The administrative access to development servers? The intimate knowledge of his personal and professional digital habits? All of it was still accessible to me, a silent, unseen weapon waiting to be wielded. My mind, which had been consumed by grief, now began to whir, processing possibilities, mapping out scenarios. The initial shock gave way to a chilling clarity. This was not just about getting my idea back. It was about justice. It was about making sure Liam understood the true cost of his betrayal. My first step was to secure my own digital footprint. I changed every password, enabled two-factor authentication on every account, and audited all my devices for any lingering vulnerabilities. I was paranoid, and rightly so. If Liam was capable of this, he was capable of anything. I needed to become a ghost, an untraceable shadow operating in the digital world. I set up a dedicated, encrypted machine, a clean environment from which to operate. This would be my command center, my digital fortress. Then, I began to watch. I started with public information, devouring every article about his new company, which he had audaciously named Zenith. The irony was not lost on me. He aimed for the pinnacle, built on the stolen foundation of my work. I analyzed his press releases, his social media presence, the comment section of every news story. I wanted to understand the narrative he was building, the public image he was cultivating. He was painting himself as the visionary, the sole genius behind Zenith's groundbreaking concept. It was a lie, a carefully constructed facade, and I knew exactly how to dismantle it. Next, I delved into the digital realm, where I still held access. The shared cloud drive was my first target. Everything was there. The original business plans, the detailed market research, the user interface designs, the marketing strategies, even the early pitch decks with my name clearly visible on them. He had simply copied everything, changed the company name, and removed my presence. But the metadata, the file creation dates, the version histories, they all told a different story. They were a digital timestamp of my ownership, irrefutable proof of my intellectual contribution. I meticulously downloaded every file, every document, creating a comprehensive archive of evidence. This was not just a backup, it was my arsenal. I also still had administrative access to some of the early development servers we had used, servers that Liam, in his haste and arrogance, had failed to properly secure or transfer. He had been so focused on launching Zenith, on securing that initial funding, that he had overlooked these lingering digital connections. This was a critical oversight, a gaping hole in his security posture that I was more than happy to exploit. Through these servers, I could still see fragments of his new operational environment. It was like looking through a crack in a wall, a tiny fissure that offered a glimpse into Liam's carefully constructed new world. What I saw confirmed my worst suspicions, and ignited a cold, steady fire of determination within me. He hadn't just taken my ideas and code, he had taken the very infrastructure we had built together, reskinned it, and presented it as his own. The early development servers, which I had painstakingly configured for scalability and security, were still linked to his new production environment in ways he clearly hadn't understood or bothered to sever. My old administrative credentials, forgotten by him in the rush to launch, still held surprising sway. I began to probe, cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence. The crack widened. I found configuration files still bearing my comments, database schemas I had designed, even snippets of internal documentation that referenced my original project name. It was a digital ghost town, haunted by my past work, now inhabited by Liam's audacious theft. He had migrated the data, spun up new instances, but the underlying architecture, the very bones of the operation, were mine. The security practices were abysmal. Liam, ever the showman, had focused on the facade, neglecting the foundations. He had left open ports, default passwords on some peripheral services, and a shocking lack of segmentation between development and production environments. It was a playground for anyone with even a modicum of technical savvy and a reason to look. My reason was abundant. I wasn't interested in sabotage, not yet. My goal was surgical, precise, and irrefutable. I needed to gather more than just proof of ownership. I needed proof of his intent, his deliberate deception. And I found it. Deep within an archive, a folder labeled Project Phoenix Internal Strategy. The name itself was a cruel irony, a phoenix rising from my ashes. But the contents were pure, unadulterated venom. It wasn't a single file, but a meticulously organized collection of internal communications, meeting notes, and a particularly damning strategy document. Liam, in his hubris, had used the company's internal document management system, a system I had helped design, incidentally, to plan his takeover. He hadn't bothered to delete these files, merely moved them to an obscure, rarely accessed archive folder, likely thinking no one would ever dig that deep. He underestimated my tenacity, my memory for systems, and my burning need for justice. The key document was a multi-page memo, dated just weeks after my unceremonious departure. Its title was Project Chimera Acquisition and Relaunch Plan. Chimera. Another layer of insult, a mythical beast composed of parts from different animals. The Chimera document was a chillingly precise blueprint for corporate parasitism. It laid out, in cold, analytical prose, how Liam intended to leverage the company's existing infrastructure, client base, and intellectual property while systematically dismantling its core values and vision. His plan wasn't merely an acquisition. It was a hostile assimilation disguised as a strategic pivot. The first phase, Project Phoenix, was the engineered collapse of the original company, meticulously orchestrated to devalue its stock, sow discord among its executives, and create a vacuum that only his new entity, Chimera, could fill. My unceremonious departure, it became terrifyingly clear, was not a consequence of my supposed failings, but a calculated, essential step in his scheme. I was a casualty, an obstacle removed. He detailed how my refusal to compromise on certain ethical standards and my steadfast belief in the company's original mission made me a liability. My influence, my network, my reputation, these were deemed unacceptable risks. My very integrity, once a cornerstone of my professional identity, was now a dangerous impediment to his ruthless ambition. The document outlined a meticulous process for my marginalization, a campaign of subtle undermining designed to isolate me, discredit me, and ultimately render me powerless. It wasn't just about removing me from the company, it was about ensuring I could never again pose a threat to his grand design. My steadfast belief in the company's original mission, the very ethos that had drawn me to it years ago, was not a virtue but a vulnerability, a blind spot he could exploit. He saw my loyalty as naivete, my principles as rigid dogma. The words swam before my eyes, each sentence a fresh wound, each paragraph a deeper betrayal. The sterile, academic language of the report belied the cold-blooded cruelty of its intent. It was a corporate hit list, and I was the first, most critical target. The tablet, A borrowed, unassuming device felt incandescent in my hands, radiating the heat of 1,000 suppressed angers. I was in the abandoned wing of the old office building, a place chosen for its forgotten quiet, its palpable sense of decay. Dust motes danced in the anemic glow of a distant street lamp filtering through grimy windows, illuminating my shock-frozen face. Hours must have passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time had ceased to hold meaning, replaced by the relentless thrum of dawning comprehension. My initial reaction was a sickening lurch, a disbelief so profound it bordered on the absurd. This couldn't be real. Liam, my colleague, my confidant, the man I had mentored, had painstakingly constructed my downfall with the precision of a master craftsman. Then came the anger, cold and sharp, an icicle piercing through the haze of shock. It was not the theatrical rage of a wronged individual, but the quiet, simmering fury of someone who had seen the true face of treachery. It was the anger of an architect whose masterpiece had been systematically defiled by a vandal he had once trusted with the keys. Project Phoenix was a masterpiece of corporate malevolence. It detailed how Liam would initiate a series of seemingly innocuous, yet strategically damaging operational changes. These included outsourcing critical R&D functions to a newly formed, ostensibly independent, offshore entity, a shell company, I now realized, controlled by him. This would allow him to siphon off intellectual property, transferring patents and proprietary algorithms to Chimera without raising immediate red flags. Simultaneously, he would leverage a network of compliant, or perhaps unwitting analysts to disseminate subtly negative reports about the company's financial health, exaggerating minor setbacks, and highlighting perceived inefficiencies. This would devalue the stock, making it ripe for a hostile takeover. The plan also involved sowing discord at the executive level. He had identified key figures, those with fragile egos or latent ambitions, and meticulously planned their manipulation. He would leak partial, misleading information, fostering distrust between departments, creating an environment of internal competition and suspicion. My departure, he noted, would serve as a powerful catalyst, destabilizing the existing power structure and creating a vacuum he could exploit. My network, the very connections he deemed a liability, would be systematically dismantled. Former clients, once loyal, would be subtly nudged towards Chimera through a series of irresistible offers and carefully orchestrated smear campaigns targeting the original company's perceived declining service quality. Chimera, his new entity, was designed to be a phoenix in name only. It was a parasitic organism, intended to rise not from its own ashes, but from the smoldering ruins of what we had built. Its branding, described in the document, was a perverse mirror image of our company's original values: innovative, agile, client-focused. The document lay open, a blueprint not merely for a hostile takeover, but for a complete and utter annihilation of my professional life, meticulously crafted by a man I had once considered a trusted colleague. The words blurred and then sharpened, each phrase a perfectly honed blade. My breath caught, a cold knot forming in my stomach. This was not a moment of anger, not yet. It was a moment of profound, chilling clarity. Every casual conversation, every shared ambition, every moment of perceived camaraderie, now replayed in my mind, recontextualized as a calculated step in his grand design. He had been studying me, not as a partner, but as an adversary to be understood, cataloged, and ultimately neutralized. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. He had not simply wished for my downfall. He had engineered it with the precision of a master clockmaker. The details of the plan were horrifying in their thoroughness. He had analyzed my strengths, my weaknesses, my network, turning every asset I possessed into a potential liability under his scheme. My very loyalty, my dedication to the company we had supposedly built together, was framed as a dependency he could exploit. He had seen the threads that bound me to the organization, the personal investments I had made in its people and its mission, and he had planned to snip each one by one, until I was adrift. My departure, he had written, a powerful catalyst, He had anticipated my reaction, my eventual disillusionment. Or, perhaps, he intended to manufacture it. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Had he been subtly poisoning the well all along, even before this document was conceived? Had the frustrations I had felt, the growing sense of unease, been carefully cultivated symptoms of his slow-acting toxin? It felt like gazing into the mind of a sociopath, a cold, calculating machine devoid of empathy. The innovation, agility, and client focus he planned for Chimera were not genuine values, but a cynical appropriation, a hollow shell designed to lure away everything we had built. It was a brand built on a lie, a predator in sheep's clothing. The immediate impulse was to rage, to confront him, to expose this treachery to the world. But a deeper, colder part of my mind, the part that had survived years in a competitive industry, whispered caution. His plan was too robust, too well thought out. A direct confrontation would only play into his hand, confirming my supposed instability or emotionality, exactly what he would want to leverage. He would twist my accusations, painting me as a disgruntled former employee, a paranoiac suffering from professional jealousy. He had already laid the groundwork, subtly planting seeds of doubt about my leadership style, my alleged resistance to change, my perceived inflexibility. I had been too trusting, too focused on the work itself, to notice the insidious erosion of my reputation from within. I reread the section about my network. My network, the very connections he deemed a liability, would be systematically dismantled. This was not just about severing my ties to the company, but about isolating me entirely. Former clients, once loyal, would be subtly nudged towards Chimera through a series of irresistible offers and carefully orchestrated smear campaigns, targeting the original company's perceived declining service quality. The brilliance of it, the sickening brilliance, was that it would not be a direct attack on me, but on the entity I represented, the entity he was simultaneously planning to hollow out. He would not need to discredit me personally in the eyes of clients. He would simply make our company appear obsolete, inefficient, or even worse, unreliable. My association with a failing entity would be enough. The more I absorbed the details, the more I understood the depth of his strategic foresight. He was not merely seizing an opportunity, he was creating one. He was not just reacting to market conditions, he was shaping them. This was a man who understood leverage, psychology, and the delicate balance of power within an organization. He saw people not as individuals with aspirations and fears, but as variables in an equation, to be manipulated for a desired outcome. The decision to leave, which had felt like a personal choice at the time, a response to a growing sense of disillusionment and a feeling of being undervalued, now felt like a preordained step in his meticulously choreographed dance. Had he engineered the very conditions that led me to that precipice? Had he subtly undermined my projects, diverted resources, or sown discord among my teams, all to make my position untenable? The thought was a bitter pill. It implied a level of control I found terrifying. My free will, my agency, felt diminished, reduced to a predictable reaction within his elaborate scheme. I folded the document carefully, the crisp paper feeling heavy in my hands, a physical manifestation of a crushing burden. My immediate action could not be impulsive. It had to be as calculated, as deliberate as his own. I needed to understand his vulnerabilities, his blind spots. He had studied me, now it was my turn to study him, not for partnership but for strategic engagement. I needed to become an observer, to watch his plan unfold, to identify the precise moment of maximum vulnerability. The initial phase of his plan began subtly, almost imperceptibly, as I navigated my final weeks at the company. There was a shift in the air, a subtle chill that permeated the usually vibrant corridors. Conversations became more guarded. Colleagues who had once shared candid insights now offered only polite generalities. The easy flow of information that had been the lifeblood of our collaborative environment began to congeal, replaced by a cautious reticence. Departmental meetings, once forums for open discussion, devolved into presentations where data was shared, but true insights were withheld. The seeds of distrust he had planned to sow were already germinating. I noticed the small, almost insignificant details first. A project proposal I had championed, now mysteriously stalled in approvals. A key client meeting I was scheduled to lead, suddenly rescheduled with a new lead, citing a vague conflict. My access to certain internal reports, previously unrestricted, now requiring additional layers of authorization. Each instance, on its own, could be dismissed as bureaucratic inefficiency or a minor reshuffling. But viewed through the lens of his document, they were perfectly executed microaggressions, designed to slowly chip away at my influence and authority, making my eventual departure seem logical, even inevitable. My network, that intricate web of relationships built over years of trust and mutual respect, began to fray. Phone calls to former clients, once met with immediate warmth, now went to voicemail more often than not, or were returned with a noticeable coolness. Excuses were offered, vague commitments made, but the underlying message was clear. The connection was no longer what it once was. It was not a sudden severing, but a gradual erosion, like a river slowly carving away at a riverbank. I could almost hear his insidious whispers in the background, subtly nudging them towards his new, shiny offering. The smear campaigns he had planned, targeting the original company's perceived declining service quality, were not overt attacks. They were far more insidious. They manifested as carefully leaked anecdotal evidence, thinly veiled criticisms in industry forums, and strategically placed articles hinting at internal turmoil or a lack of forward-thinking vision. The company's once sterling reputation began to acquire a faint tarnish, a subtle cloud of doubt that clung to it like a persistent mist. It was enough to make clients question, to make them receptive to the siren song of a new, innovative player. Chimera emerged not with a bang, but with a carefully orchestrated ripple. Its initial branding materials were indeed a perverse mirror image of our values. They spoke of disruption, agility, and a relentless focus on client success, using language eerily similar to our own founding principles, yet infused with a slick, almost sterile veneer. Their initial offerings were strategically priced, almost aggressively so, designed to undercut our established services, while promising a level of innovation that, on the surface, seemed genuinely appealing. It was a trap, I knew, but one so cleverly laid that it would be difficult for anyone without my insider knowledge to discern its true nature. The launch announcements were accompanied by a flurry of positive industry buzz, carefully cultivated through PR channels. The articles highlighted Chimera's visionary leadership, his leadership of course, its cutting-edge technology, and its fresh approach to old problems. There were subtle comparisons to established players, always hinting at their perceived stagnation, their inability to adapt. It was a masterclass in reputation building through contrast, a calculated effort to position Chimera as the future and my former company as the past. The psychological toll was immense. Every day brought a new confirmation of his plan unfolding, the realization that I had,